I'm Margaret Calloway, 51 years old, and I've spent 29 years in the United States Navy, including 20 of them on a prosthetic leg, after an IED in Kuwait took my right leg below the knee when I was 30. I kept going anyway. I made flag anyway. And when my son's commanding officer laughed at me on a ship's quarterdeck for the way I walk, I let his own Master Chief handle it. For years, my family told me I was playing soldier with one foot, that it was time to come home, that no one could keep climbing after something like that. I proved them wrong one promotion at a time, until I had 2 stars and a career they couldn't explain away. But this story isn't really about rank. It's about what it costs to stay when everyone who loves you is asking you to stop, and what it feels like when you finally don't have to explain yourself to anyone anymore. Have you ever had the people closest to you decide who you should be before you got to find out for yourself? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into everything that happened, tell me where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to keep going when someone told you to stop, hit that like button and subscribe. My father was a chief petty officer in the United States Navy, and he spent the first 14 years of my life teaching me, mostly by example, that there are 2 kinds of people: the ones who keep their word and the ones who don't. He was a decorated sailor and a difficult husband, and by the time I understood the difference, he was already gone. My parents divorced when I was 14. My mother moved my sister Dana and me to Richmond, and my father retired and drifted in, the way that men drift when they've lost the structure that defined them. I grew up without him in any meaningful sense, but I grew up with the Navy, the rank insignia, the deployments, the particular seriousness of it. And by the time I was applying to NROTC at the University of Virginia in the fall of 1993, I had already decided I was going to go further than my father ever did. Not to outshine him, he wasn't present enough to outshine. I was going to go further because the life I had seen through the edges of his career looked like something worth building. I commissioned as an ensign in the United States Navy in May of 1997, and I did it as a single mother. Ryan had been born in the spring of my sophomore year at UVA. His father was charming in the temporary way of young men who haven't been tested, and absent by the time Ryan was 6 months old. My mother raised Ryan in Richmond during my last 2 years of school and my first months at Norfolk. By the time he was 6, he was living with me in base housing, starting first grade in a school where half the kids had parents on ships. He was 7 when I came home and found him lining up his action figures in precise rows along his dresser. He told me they were at attention waiting for the Admiral. I said the Admiral wasn't in our household. He looked at me with complete calm. "Not yet," he said. I have never been more exactly seen by another person, and he was 7 years old. Dana was 3 years older than me, settled in Richmond with her husband Carl, and had built a life that was fully legitimate and also represented every choice I had specifically decided not to make. She was not cruel. She simply couldn't locate my choices on any map she recognized, so she filed them under reckless. My mother was warmer and no more comprehending. Patricia Calloway loved me entirely and understood me through the specific lens of her own experience, and her experience had not prepared her for a daughter who would choose what I chose. My career was confusing to her, not because she opposed women in the military, but because she opposed the particular version where her daughter was deployed and her grandson was in base housing, and she was in Richmond wondering what she'd done wrong. I was deployed for the first time in 2003 when Ryan was 9. We wrote letters, physical letters on paper, because I wanted him to have something to hold when I was on the other side of the world. He wrote back in careful schoolboy cursive. Every letter opened the same. "Dear Mom, I am fine. How are you? I hope you are safe." He was 9 years old, already placing someone else's experience before his own need to be reassured. I kept every letter in a box in my quarters. When I came home and was putting things away, I opened his closet and found a shoebox on the shelf, his name on the lid in his own handwriting. I opened it. Every letter I had written him from overseas in order, tied with a rubber band. I stood in the doorway holding that box for a long moment. I was promoted to lieutenant commander in 2005 and assigned to theater support operations in Kuwait. The convoy I was riding in was struck by an improvised explosive device in February of that year. I was 30 years old. I woke up in the ICU at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany with an abscess below my right knee that was going to require permanent adjustment. I was angry in the first week, in the private way I'm always angry. Composed outside, furious at the interior edges. By the second week, I had arrived at pragmatism. By the time I was transferred to Walter Reed, I was asking specific questions about prosthetics and rehabilitation timelines, because those were the questions with answers I could act on. Ryan came with my mother to Walter Reed. He was 11. He did not cry. He held my hand, and after a few minutes asked, with complete directness, "Does it hurt? Like, does it hurt, or is it just weird?" I told him more weird than hurt at that stage. He nodded. "Good. Then you can still do stuff." My mother was in the chair by the window, doing the crying for both of them, which was understandable. But it was Ryan I watched. 11 years old, deciding on the spot that this was not an ending, just a development. He was the clearest person in my life then. He still is. There is no dramatic moment I can point to where I decided who I was going to be. It was not the commissioning ceremony, though that mattered. It was not my father leaving, though that shaped things. It was more like a gradual accumulation of certainty that built across years. The NROTC physical training at 5 a.m, the decision to keep Ryan and finish the degree, the commissioning itself, and then every subsequent morning when I woke up and put on the uniform and went to work and felt, unmistakably, that I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. That feeling is not something you manufacture. It is something you recognize when you are in it. I recognized it early and I never lost it. My recovery and return to active duty in 2006 was the beginning of what I think of as the second chapter. The one where I had to reassemble everything I had built, with new equipment, inside a family that had decided, while I was at Walter Reed, that the reassembly itself was a mistake. I was assigned to a shore billet at Naval Air Station Oceana, which was the appropriate assignment for my physical situation, and I treated it the way I treat every assignment, as the work in front of me to be done well. Relearning to run took 11 months. That sentence compresses what it actually involved. 300 and some days of daily recalibration, measuring improvement in increments honest enough to be real, working through the specific physical logic of balance and momentum and compensatory muscular effort until I could manage 3 miles without compensating visibly in my stride. I ran every morning. I did not discuss the difficulty widely. I was specific and clinical with my physical therapist and composed with everyone else. Ryan was 12 and back living with me, starting middle school. He woke up every morning and watched me ice the residual limb before I put on the prosthetic, and he never made a face, never suggested I do it somewhere private. He handed me the ice pack when I reached for it, the way you hand someone something when it's near your side of the table. No ceremony in it, no performance. Just 2 people managing a morning. My mother began calling every Sunday with a new version of the same proposal. A friend's husband had taken medical retirement after a knee injury and was gardening now, much happier. She'd seen something on television about veterans' transition programs. Dana had talked to someone at a company in Richmond that was specifically respectful of veterans' service. Every Sunday, different words, identical structure. I listened to each version with the same attention I give everything, told her each Sunday I was not planning to retire, and she received this with a brief silence and pivoted to asking about Ryan's grades or his teacher or what he was eating. Dana's version of the same concern arrived with more certainty. She communicated worry as a case to be made, and she had done her research. She came to Richmond for a dinner in the spring of 2007 that I understood within 20 minutes had been arranged well in advance. Carl was there. The meal was more elaborate than usual. Dana had a sequence. She went through it methodically, the insurance picture, the realistic trajectory for a woman advancing in a military system with a significant documented physical limitation, the question of what Ryan needed in terms of a stable home environment. She spoke like someone who had arrived at her conclusion and was now reading the evidence into the record. Then she said it plainly. "You're playing soldier with one foot, Maggie. It's time to grow up." The table was quiet. My mother looked at her plate. Carl looked at the painting above the sideboard. I looked at Dana and felt something in my chest that was not grief and was not hot anger, but clarity. The specific, clean clarity that arrives when someone says exactly the wrong thing with such precision that the right path becomes obvious. I thanked my mother for dinner, said goodnight, drove home to Norfolk with Ryan asleep in the back seat and the radio off. The drive was an hour and 40 minutes. I arrived at a decision that had been forming for 2 years and was now permanent. My family had drawn a map of my life that ended in Richmond, and I was already somewhere else, and I was not going back. My mother's Sunday calls stopped for a while. There's a specific kind of grief in the silence of a mother who loves you and has temporarily decided she can't locate you. I did not chase it. I gave her space to find her way back on her own terms, which she eventually did. Slowly, imperfectly, in the way people return to things when the absence has become more uncomfortable than whatever they were protecting themselves from. I missed her during that time. I kept going. Commander in 2009. Ryan was 15 at the ceremony in khakis because I'd told him to dress up, watching the proceedings with the careful expression of someone who doesn't have all the context but fully understands the weight. In the parking lot afterward, he said with complete seriousness, "Are you the same rank as Dad now?" I explained there was no rank for Dad. That was a different system. He thought about this. "But you're still going up?" "Yes." He nodded once. "Good." The milestones kept coming. My promotion to captain in 2016. A text from Donna with 2 exclamation points. My first star in 2021. She called and said, "I never know what those titles mean. Is that a good one?" I told her, "Yes, that's a good one." She said, "Good for you." I thanked her and meant it because she was trying, and trying from Donna was something. And I had learned to receive the things people were capable of giving rather than holding out for the things they weren't. The years between the intervention dinner and the ceremony at Norfolk were not years I spent waiting for acknowledgement that didn't come. They were years I spent working. That is the part of this story that doesn't have a dramatic shape. The daily accumulation, the long stretch of effort and progress and gradual ascent, none of it visible until suddenly it is. I want to tell you that part plainly because the dramatic moments, the quarterdeck, the salute, the silence, only mean what they mean because of everything that came before them. The long road is the story. The dramatic moments are just the markers on it. The morning of April 23rd, 2026 began the way my mornings usually begin. I was at the Pentagon before 6:30. My aide, Lieutenant Commander Alicia Park, briefed me at the door. Congressional liaison at 9, budget review at 11, flag sync in the afternoon. 2 stars on my shoulder boards and a prosthetic on my right leg and the view of early Arlington light through the window, none of it remarkable in the way things become unremarkable once you've lived in them long enough to stop measuring them against what they were supposed to look like. I had a half day of leave starting at noon. I drove myself south to Norfolk, 2 hours and 30 minutes on an interstate that relaxes once you've cleared the city. I listened to music I've been listening to since I was 19 years old at UVA, with the windows cracked and the flat coastal light crossing the dashboard. I was in a mood for the kind of quiet that comes before something good. The decision to wear civilian clothes to Ryan's professional milestones was one I made when he commissioned in 2016 and have never revisited. I am entirely within protocol attending any Navy function in my uniform, but I made a private commitment at his commissioning. His days were his. I was going to show up the way I showed up to his school events when he was small, as his mother first. He worked for everything on his record. I was not going to arrive at his promotion ceremony with 2 stars and make his moment into a story about my rank. I chose a dark blue blazer, gray slacks, civilian shoes. I parked in the visitor lot at Naval Station Norfolk. Not the flag lot, the visitor lot near the main gate. I signed in as Margaret Calloway, guest of Lieutenant Commander Ryan Calloway, USS Harlan County. I walked up the brow. The quarterdeck of a guided missile destroyer has a geometry I have known for 30 years. The angles of deck plate, the smell of salt and metal and paint, the low vibration of systems that never fully quiet. I have walked onto ships my entire adult life, and I still feel the same thing every time. Not pride, not authority, but something quieter. A recognition, as if the ship and I are simply familiar with each other. I stepped onto the quarterdeck and began walking toward the forward deck where the ceremony was assembled. The harbor was moving. The morning was clear. Captain Derek Holt was near the brow with 2 of his officers, all 3 in service dress blues. He was in his mid-40s, comfortable in his authority. He saw me walking, the slightly deliberate quality of gait that comes from carbon fiber on steel deck plating, and said it the way people say things they believe they can say, easily without fully looking up, in the casual voice of a man who had not been corrected in some time. "Try not to trip on deck, sweetheart." Short laugh. One of his officers produced the small, constrained smile of a man who knew exactly what had just happened and was not going to address it. I did not stop walking. I have heard variations of this thing for 30 years. And I knew within 2 seconds that it was ignorance and arrogance in equal measure, and that neither required my immediate response. I kept my pace. Master Chief Thomas Vasquez came around the starboard side of the quarterdeck. He had served under my command at Naval Support Activity Naples for 2 years, and he had a Master Chief's memory for faces and a Master Chief's complete indifference to whatever else was happening in a room when something more important required his attention. He saw me the moment I cleared the approach. He came through the space between Captain Holt and the rail without hesitation. Not aggressively, simply with the purposeful efficiency of a man whose attention had been claimed. He stepped directly in front of me and snapped to rigid attention. His right hand came up in a salute that was precise, complete, and unhurried. "Admiral Calloway, ma'am. I didn't know you were coming aboard. Welcome aboard, ma'am." I returned his salute the way I return every salute. Present, correct, without performance. "Master Chief Vasquez, good to see you." Every sailor on that quarterdeck came to attention. The 2 officers beside Captain Holt came to attention. Captain Holt came to attention. His expression passed through confusion, then the widening of recognition, then the specific quality of a man who understands, all at once, the full shape of what he has just said and where he will live with it. He addressed me. "Admiral, ma'am. I apologize. I was not aware." I met his eyes. "At ease, Captain." I continued toward the ceremony. The ceremony was on the forward deck with the harbor visible beyond the rail. Ryan was called forward and stood at attention in his dress blues, controlling a smile, and when he turned and found me in the crowd, his face did the thing it has done since he was a child. Something in his expression reaches backward through time, and he is briefly the same person he was at 7 or 11 or 15. He pinned on his new devices with steady hands. The crew applauded. Ryan held his hand out briefly, just a moment, just the contact. And I took it. Behind us, Captain Derek Holt stood with his hands clasped behind his back and the expression of a man already constructing something he was going to have to say. In the passageway below, decks after the ceremony, Ryan found me before anyone else did. One of his junior officers had pulled him aside during the reception portion and told him what had happened on the quarterdeck before the ceremony began. Ryan was managing his composure with visible effort. He has his mother's self-discipline and his own slower fuse, and right now, the fuse had a short length of run left on it. He asked me directly whether Captain Holt had actually said it. I told him yes, he said. "And you just walked past him?" I said yes. He looked at me for a moment in the way he processes things he needs to sit with fully before he can respond to them, and then he said quietly, "You could have destroyed him." I said I knew. There was a pause. He said, "You're a better person than I would have been." I told him that this variety of thing had happened to me before, not always in those exact words, but in the spirit of those words, in various settings over 30 years, and that I had learned over a long time that the cost of engaging every instance was a cost I preferred to spend elsewhere, that the response I had just not given Captain Holt on the quarterdeck had not erased anything. Nothing had been erased. The quarterdeck had 40-odd sailors on it that morning, and every one of them had just received very specific and permanent information about both of us. That was sufficient. Ryan listened to this and nodded. He does not always agree with my approach to these things, but he understands the reasoning, and understanding it is enough. He pulled me in briefly before we went back up, the kind of quick hug that adult children give their parents when they are trying not to make a scene. And then we went back to the ceremony space and received his colleagues and their families and drank the official Navy coffee and did the standing around that follows these events. Master Chief Thomas Vasquez found me near the quarterdeck as the guests were beginning to clear out. He had stepped out of ceremony mode. There was no formal posture in what he was doing, just a man in his early 50s who had served under my command for 2 years and wanted to say something to me directly before I left the ship. He told me the Naples command had been the best 2 years of his career. He was not theatrical about it. He did not dress it up or make it into a speech. He said I had run a command where people wanted to do the work, where the work felt worth doing, and that this was not common and that he had thought about it many times since. He said, "I wanted you to know that, Admiral." I thanked him and I meant it in the particular way you mean something when it lands accurately. When the thing someone says to you is the precise true thing about the part of your work that you actually cared about. Leadership is easy to describe in terms of results and metrics and the things that end up in fitness reports. What is harder to describe and what actually matters is whether the people working alongside you feel that the work they're doing has weight. Thomas Vasquez was telling me that he had felt that. That was the whole job. He started to turn away, then stopped. He said, "One more thing, ma'am. I'm going to make sure the captain addresses you formally before you leave." I told him it wasn't necessary. He looked at me with the mild, steady expression of a master chief who has made a decision. "It is to me, ma'am," he said. Captain Holt found me near the brow 20 minutes later. He was composed, which I noted and respected. It is not easy to apologize to someone you've just publicly insulted in front of your own crew, and doing so with composure requires something. He addressed me by rank, he said the words unprofessional and conduct unbecoming, and my full responsibility. He did not hedge, and he did not slip into self-pity or self-justification, and he did not offer the explanation that he hadn't known who I was, which is the explanation that would have made me less inclined to accept the apology. He simply said what he had done was wrong and that he was sorry. I received it. I told him I appreciated the apology and that I wished him well in his command. I said nothing further. I did not file a report, file a complaint, or discuss the matter with anyone in his chain of command. I have never believed in arranging consequences for people when circumstances will arrange them adequately without my involvement. Captain Holt will spend the remainder of his tour on USS Harlan County, knowing that 40 sailors watched him mock a rear admiral and watched his master chief correct the situation without being asked. He will carry that in every morning brief and every department head meeting and every time he walks across that quarterdeck. That is not a punishment I constructed. It is simply the natural and permanent cost of saying certain things in front of people who don't forget. Dana called me at 9 o'clock that evening. Ryan had called her earlier and given her the full account. The remark, the Master Chief's salute, the silence, all of it. Dana was quiet in the way she gets quiet when she doesn't know where to settle herself, and there was something different in the quality of her silence this time, something that felt less like resistance and more like arrival. She said, "I didn't realize how far you'd... I knew, but I didn't really understand." She stopped. I waited. She said, "I'm proud of you, Maggie. I don't think I've ever actually said that." I said thank you. I said it simply, and I meant it without qualification. 20 years late, arriving in the form of a phone call after a ceremony she hadn't attended, imprecise as it was, still worth receiving fully. She asked how the ceremony had gone otherwise. I told her it was wonderful. She said she was glad. And then, in the way Dana ends conversations, when she has said the things she called to say, there was a small silence and then a goodbye. I held the phone for a moment after she hung up. I sat at the hotel window for a while after that, looking at the harbor in the dark. The ships were lit, the water moved, there were lights on the far side of the water, and the sound of a late boat somewhere. I did not need to process all of it into something organized that night. Some things you let land rather than immediately sorting them. I let it land. 2 years after that dinner in Richmond, 2 years after you're playing soldier with one foot, I stood in a Navy ceremony room at Naval Station Norfolk in my dress blues with a new stripe on my sleeve and was promoted to commander. Ryan was 15, in khakis because I'd told him to dress up, watching with the expression of someone who doesn't have all the context, but fully grasps that the event has weight. In the parking lot, he said, "Are you the same rank as Dad now?" I explained there was no rank for Dad, different system. He thought about it. "But you're still going up?" "Yes." "Good," he said. That ceremony happened because of decisions that began the night I drove home from my mother's table, with Ryan asleep in the back seat. I've thought about that drive many times. An hour and 40 minutes on Interstate 64 with the radio off, Dana's words sitting in my chest like something inert and dense. Not trying to minimize what she'd said, but examining it honestly. She had said what she believed, and she'd believed it fully. What I arrived at by the time I saw the base lights on the horizon was simple. She was wrong, and I was not going to let her be right by doing what she was asking. The physical evaluation process took most of 2006 and all of 2007. I was patient through the boards and persistent in my advocacy for my own fitness, answering every question about limitations with specifics and documentation. I was a lieutenant commander with a clean record who had been injured in service, and I was going to be retained on the grounds of my record and my current fitness. By 2009, the retention path was clear. I had lost 2 years to recovery and assignment adjustment. That was the full cost, and it was within the range I had decided I could accept. My promotion to commander was not early, not exceptional. It was what was expected of someone with my record who had been delayed 2 years by injury. It was the cost and nothing more. I had decided early in recovery that the cost was acceptable, and I held to that decision. The hardest professional year was 2014. I had applied for a C command billet, the command I had been building toward, and the selection board passed over me. The notes cited assignment history weighting and relative seniority. I read them twice, sat with the result for 2 weeks, and did not make it into a public grievance. I considered seriously whether the path I had committed to was going to reach where I intended. And then I found the door they had neglected to lock. I applied for the shore command at Naval Support Activity Naples and got it, and I took command in the fall of 2014 and ran it through standard and decency, in that order, every day. Master Chief Thomas Vasquez was on my command staff in Naples. He was a career Master Chief, a man of entirely blunt competence and zero tolerance for theater. About 3 months into the tour, after a morning brief that had gone well, he stopped me in the passageway and said, "Ma'am, I've served under 4 commanding officers. This is the first time I've actually looked forward to the morning brief." I said I was glad to hear it. He said, "I'm not complimenting you. I'm telling you what it means." I have thought about the distinction between those two things many times since. There is a difference between being told you are good and being told that your goodness has produced something real in someone's actual daily experience. The second one costs more to say. It also matters more. I was promoted to Captain 06 in 2016, the same year Ryan commissioned as an ensign, 2 Callaways advancing in the same institution in the same year, wearing the same uniform for reasons that were different and pointed at the same thing. I attended his commissioning ceremony at George Mason in full dress whites, captain's insignia, decorations, prosthetic, and pinned his ensign bars on myself. His hands were steady. Afterward, he said, "I'm going to be good at this, Mom." I said I knew. He said, "I've had a good example." We left it there. My first star came in 2021. The selection list was published at 7 in the morning, and my aide called at 7:04. I was in a parking structure in Arlington. I sat with the information for 5 seconds, and then I laughed. Not triumph or ceremony, just the involuntary response to 24 years of motion resolving into something official and irreversible. I sat there alone and laughed, and then I went upstairs and went to work. My second star came in 2024. My mother called when the announcement was made. She said she was proud of me, in the careful way she says things when she means them, but isn't certain of the territory. I told her thank you, and I meant it. She asked if I was eating properly. I said yes. We talked about Thanksgiving plans for 15 minutes. Some conversations are exactly what they need to be, and I have learned to receive them at that level without expecting more than they offer. The years between 2009 and 2021 are the years that don't have a clean narrative shape when you try to describe them from the outside. From the inside, they had enormous shape. Each year was distinct, each decision mattered, each setback and recovery and incremental advance carried its own specific weight. From the outside, it looked like 12 years of a woman in uniform doing her job, which is accurate and misses almost everything. I got very good at the job. That sounds unremarkable, and it isn't. Getting very good at a job as demanding as senior military command, over a decade plus of sustained effort, in a body that required ongoing physical management, required a specific kind of daily commitment that has no dramatic moments in it. The dramatic moments are the ones that get remembered and recounted. The actual work is the morning run at 6 in the morning and the afternoon that goes until 8. And the decision to prepare for the next evaluation rather than rest after the current one, and the slow accumulation of evidence that you are someone whose record speaks for itself. I ran every morning until the prosthetic made running the way I had run before impractical, and then I recalibrated. I cycled, I swam. I found the physical regimen that worked with the equipment I had rather than the equipment I had lost, and I maintained it, and I passed every physical fitness requirement the Navy set for my grade and age group throughout my entire career after the injury. I did not make this public, and I did not discuss it. It was simply the standard, and I met it. The prosthetic was upgraded twice between 2006 and 2026. The technology improved significantly over those 20 years. Weight, flex, durability. By 2015, I had a prosthetic that was so well fitted and so functionally integrated into my gait that most people who met me for the first time did not notice anything different about the way I walked unless they were looking for it. Those who were looking for it were generally divided into two groups: people who noticed and then adjusted their behavior accordingly, and people who noticed and then said something. The second group was always smaller than the first, and it got smaller as I got more senior, because people are more careful about what they say out loud to someone with more rank than they have. Captain Holt had been an outlier in that regard. He saw a civilian and applied the logic he would have applied to a civilian, which is a specific kind of carelessness that comes from long practice. Between 2009 and 2016, commander to captain, there were 7 years of assignments, command tours, joint billets, Pentagon work. There was the Naples Command, which I have already described, and which produced a record that closed the question of the Sea Command billet. There was a joint assignment in Washington that required a different skill set and taught me things about inter-service operations and congressional relations that I had not previously needed and subsequently used constantly. There was a period in 2013 when I was preparing for a promotion board and working 14-hour days for several months, and Ryan, who was 19 and in his second year at George Mason and calling me more frequently than usual, asked me once during a Sunday call whether I ever thought about slowing down. I told him no. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "That's not a criticism. I just wanted to know if you did." I told him that slowing down was not a category I had available to me yet, and that I would let him know when it became one. He said okay. He said, "I just want to make sure you're okay." I told him I was more than okay. I was exactly where I intended to be. He said, "Good." And then he asked me what I was reading, because he was reading something he wanted to discuss, and we talked about that for 40 minutes, which was its own version of everything being fine. The flag billet came with the promotion to Rear Admiral Lower Half in 2021 and brought with it a set of responsibilities that I will describe as large without being more specific, because the specific work is not the story I'm telling here. What I will say is that the transition from captain to flag officer is a real transition, not just in what you do, but in how you operate, in the scale of the decisions, in the way other people relate to you. Some of the adjustment was straightforward. Some of it required recalibration of habits I had built over 20 years. All of it was worth doing. My promotion to Rear Admiral, full Rear Admiral, 08, 2 stars, came in 2024 when I was 49 years old. I called Ryan when the selection was announced. He said, "I knew it was going to happen. I've been waiting for you to tell me." I asked how long he'd been waiting. He said, "Since about 2015. I told him that was generous. He said it was accurate, which is different from generous. Dana sent a card. My mother called. Neither of them fully understood what the promotion represented in terms of career trajectory and institutional significance, and neither needed to. My mother said she was proud of me in the careful way she says things when she means them, but isn't sure of the territory. I told her thank you. I told her it meant a great deal to me. She asked if I was eating properly, and I told her yes, and we talked about Thanksgiving plans for 15 minutes. Some conversations are exactly what they need to be. The years I am describing, the years between the injury and the second star, are 20 years. 20 years is a significant portion of a person's life, and I am aware that summarizing them, even at this length, compresses them in ways that lose detail. What I can tell you is that every day of those 20 years, I put on the prosthetic and went to work and did the work in front of me to the best of my ability on that day. And that over 20 years of doing that, a great deal accumulates. That is all that happened. There was no secret. There was no shortcut. There was no single moment where things turned. There was only the accumulation of effort over time, which is the only thing that actually works, and which looks, from a distance, like something more dramatic than it is. There is a box in my apartment in Arlington that holds every letter Ryan wrote me during my deployments. The earliest ones are from 2003 when he was 9. The handwriting is careful, slightly labored, letter by letter, the way kids write when they've been told to slow down, and the effort shows respect. The content was consistently school, weather, the neighbor's dog, what he was playing, what he'd watched, and then, always, before the closing. I hope you're safe. Every single letter from age 9 until he was 14. The handwriting in the last ones was loose and fast, a teenager's confident scrawl. The sentence was still there. When I came home from that first deployment and was putting things away, I opened his closet and found a shoebox on the shelf with his name on the lid. I opened it. Every letter I had sent him from overseas, in order, tied with a rubber band. I stood there holding the box for a long moment before I put it back. When he was 20, we were sitting on the back steps of my apartment in Norfolk, the same way we used to sit on the back steps in base housing when he was small, and he told me what those letters had cost him. He said he had been afraid every deployment, not the fear that changes your behavior, but the kind that sits permanently in the back of your chest until the person comes home. He wrote because writing made him feel connected across the distance. I hope you are safe was not a formula. It was a specific, genuine hope, and writing it felt more true than just thinking it. I had been keeping those letters for 11 years when he told me that. I did not tell him so. I just sat with what he said. When Ryan applied for NROTC in 2015, he called me after the application was already submitted. He had not consulted me, and he said, "I put in my NROTC application. I wanted you to know." I asked if he was sure. He said yes. I asked why he hadn't mentioned it before. He said, "Because I wanted to decide for myself." That was the right answer. I took leave to attend his induction ceremony, stood at the back of the room in uniform, and watched my son join the same institution I had joined 18 years before him. What I felt has no clean name. Satisfaction is too small, pride too easy. It was recognition, the thing that was always going to happen, happening. He commissioned in May of 2016. I pinned his ensign bars on. His hands were steady. Afterward, he said, "I'm going to be good at this, Mom." I told him I knew. He said, "I've had a good example." We left it at that, which was the right decision because there was nothing to add to make it more true. The phone call I returned to most often came in 2023. He was on his second sea tour in the Pacific, a lieutenant commander in good standing. He called on a Tuesday morning and said he needed to tell me something. He said, "You're the reason I became an officer. Not because of your rank, because of what you did after Kuwait, because you didn't stop. That's what I wanted to be. Someone who doesn't stop." He said it without preamble and without making it into more than it was. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Ryan, that's everything." He said, "I know." We talked for another 30 minutes about his deployment and his department and a book he'd been reading. The conversation was ordinary, and it was also the one I will carry for the rest of my life. I want to say something plainly about Ryan and me and what we built together. He grew up in base housing in apartments and schools, where a lot of kids had a parent who was deployed or frequently gone, and he learned early to be self-sufficient and to manage his own interior life. He learned some of that from me. He learned a great deal of it from how he handled the version of growing up he was given. He is not defined by the cost of my career. He is, in part, made by how he met that cost. He is 32 years old and a lieutenant commander and a husband and a person of genuinely good character, and I had the privilege of being there for some of it. He did the work of becoming who he is. The best thing a parent can do is give the example and the structure and the consistent honesty, and let the person grow from there. That is all I did. It turned out to be enough. When I think about the question that gets asked most often, how do you keep going when people around you have decided you should stop? The honest answer is that I never experienced it as a question requiring an answer. The choice to stop was never available to me in any real sense. Not because I'm exceptional, not because I lacked the normal human appetite for rest and easier paths, but because I understood very early that the life I was building was the life I was supposed to be building, and every piece of evidence that came back confirming that, Ryan at the end of the parallel bars, Thomas Vasquez stopping me in a Naples passageway, a star on my shoulder board, was simply confirmation of a thing I already knew. The people who told me to stop did not have better information than I had. They had a different picture of me. I had the actual one. 2 weeks before the ceremony, my daily life at the Pentagon looked the way it looks most days. Full, specific, and moving at the pace of an institution that never fully stops. I was in the building before 6:30 every morning. My aide briefed me at the door. The calendar had what the calendar always has. Meetings with people who need decisions that require background that requires time to read and synthesize and form a view on. I am good at this work. I have been good at it for long enough that it no longer requires the effort it once did. and the effort it does require is effort I have the capacity for. That is what 29 years builds, capacity. My office window faces toward Arlington. In the early mornings, before the building gets loud and the hallways fill, the light through that window does something specific. It comes in flat and clear and steady, and you can see the city assembling itself through it, the shapes of buildings becoming distinct as the light builds. I have stood at that window on and off for 4 years, first as a rear admiral lower half and then as a full rear admiral. And what I do there is not prayer and not meditation and not strategy review. It is simply standing in a place I earned and being present in it. It takes about 3 minutes, and it is worth considerably more than 3 minutes. I recommend it. 2 weeks before the ceremony, I had lunch with a colleague, a fellow flag officer who had been at the Pentagon as long as I had, 3 years now, and who knew me well enough to ask actual questions instead of polite ones. We ate standing at a high-top table in the main cafeteria, which is how we always ate when neither of us had time to sit down properly, which was most days. She asked how I was. I told her I was well. Ryan's promotion was coming up. I was taking the afternoon of the 23rd. She asked which ship. I told her the Harlan County. She nodded and said she'd served with the XO once in a previous assignment. We talked about the frigate procurement program for 15 minutes and then went back to our respective offices. That was Tuesday. On Thursday, I drove to Norfolk. The world does not pause for significant personal events, which I have always considered a feature rather than a limitation. The decision about civilian clothes was not a difficult decision when it came time to make it for this occasion. It was the same decision I had been making for 10 years at Ryan's professional milestones. I thought about it briefly, checked that it still made sense, confirmed that it did, and moved on. I am not concealing my rank when I show up to these events in civilian clothes. I know who I am. The people who need to know who I am know who I am. I am choosing to set the rank aside for the specific hours of my son's moment because his moment is his, and my presence as his mother is more valuable to both of us than my presence as a flag officer. I selected a dark blue blazer and gray slacks and civilian shoes. I packed my overnight bag. I set an alarm for 5 in the morning because I intended to be on the road before 6, which would put me in Norfolk before 9 with time to spare. I went to sleep early, which I always do when I need to be somewhere in the morning. This is a habit from 30 years in the Navy. You sleep when you have the opportunity, because the opportunity is not always available. Dana called 2 days before the ceremony. It was not the call I had been expecting. Not her usual register of careful questions designed to assess a situation from a safe distance. She asked about the ceremony format and who would be there, and then there was a pause and she said, "Are you proud of him?" I said, "Of course, more than I can say." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think you should be proud of yourself, too, for all of it." The sentence was imprecise in the way that Dana's sentences about me are usually imprecise. She doesn't have the language for my specific career, and she has stopped pretending otherwise. But the intent was clear and genuine and fully arrived, and I received it as the gesture it was. I packed the car that night and drove south in the early morning, the best driving, the morning hours before traffic builds, and the interstate belongs mostly to trucks and early travelers. The coast plain opened out below Richmond, and the light came up flat and clean across the fields, and I listened to albums I've been listening to since I was a teenager, and I thought about nothing that required effort. I stopped for coffee at a gas station on the coastal plain and stood in the parking lot with my cup and looked at the morning and did not think about rank or ceremony or what any of it meant. Just the morning, just the coffee, just the quiet. I parked in the visitor lot at the base, not the flag lot. I had made this deliberate choice when I confirmed I was going as a guest, and I did not second-guess it. I signed in at the main gate as Margaret Calloway guest. The petty officer at the gate was professional and prompt and had no particular reason to look at me twice. I walked to the pier. The day was clear and cool. April on the Virginia coast, the harbor moving in the way it always moves. I walked up the brow and onto the quarterdeck of USS Harlan County, and the ship felt exactly the way a ship feels. The smell of salt and paint and machinery, the low vibration of systems running, the geometry of a working vessel that has been cared for. I have stepped onto more ships in my career than I have counted, and it still produces the same response in me. Not a performance of feeling, just the body recognizing a familiar and meaningful environment. I am a Navy officer. This is where I have always been most completely myself. The quarterdeck and Captain Holt and Master Chief Vasquez were 17 seconds away. I was walking steadily. The harbor was bright, The morning was exactly what it was supposed to be. The dinner was at a waterfront restaurant Ryan had chosen, not formal, which was the right call, not loud, which was also the right call, and with a view of the harbor in early evening that was straightforwardly worth looking at. He had made a reservation for 5, himself and Claire, 2 colleagues from the ship, and me. I arrived to find them already at the table, and the particular warmth of walking into a room where someone has been looking forward to seeing you. Claire, who was 30 and had the quality of someone who processes information quickly and acts on it with confidence, had clearly been given a thorough account of me before tonight and was measuring in real time whether the account was accurate. She made her assessment by the time the menus arrived and was warm and genuine thereafter. She said about 40 minutes in, while I was telling a moderately abbreviated version of my decision to pursue the Navy, "She's underselling everything." Ryan said, "She always does." I told them I was telling it at the appropriate scale. Ryan looked at me with the expression of someone who is not going to argue a point he knows he'll lose. His colleague Sarah was Lieutenant Sarah Okafor, 28, direct in the way that good junior officers are direct. She asked the question rather than inferring the answer and hoping she got it right. She asked about the prosthetic about an hour into dinner. She framed it carefully and asked it straight. "Does it limit anything, ma'am, if you don't mind?" I told her I didn't mind. I told her the honest version. Yes, it limits some things, and in 20 years, I have adapted to those limits, and the adaptation itself has given me things I would not otherwise have. That having to recalibrate how you move through the world teaches you something about movement and about what your body actually owes you versus what you feel entitled to assume. That the physical limitations are real and manageable, and that I have not been defined by them except in the specific positive sense that managing them over a long time produced a kind of endurance I might not have built otherwise. She nodded slowly, processing this. Ryan was watching me with the expression he gets when I say something he intends to keep. Ryan's other colleague, a young lieutenant named Marcus Webb, 26, who had been quiet for most of dinner in the manner of someone concentrating on everything, asked about the quarterdeck. He had not been there when it happened, but the word had moved through the ship the way words move on ships, which is immediately and completely. He said, "Is it true the Master Chief just stepped in front of the captain?" I said, "Yes, that was accurate." He said, "And you were in civilian clothes?" I said, "Yes." He sat with this for a moment. He said, he just knew. He just saw you and knew." I said that Thomas Vasquez has always been a man who knows what he's looking at. Marcus nodded, as if this confirmed something he was trying to articulate. Ryan said, "She's known Thomas Vasquez since he was her Master Chief in Naples." He wasn't going to let it stand. There was a particular quality to the way Ryan said this. Pride, and also a kind of relief, as though a thing that had needed to be made right had been made right in exactly the right way, by exactly the right person. After dinner, we walked out to the waterfront railing and stood there for a while, the 5 of us, looking at the ships in the harbor as the evening came down soft and clear. Ryan stood beside me, and for a while nobody said anything, which was comfortable. Then he said, "Today was good." I said, "Yes." He said, "I mean the whole thing. Holt, Vasquez, everything. It was good." I asked what he meant specifically. He said, "It means you don't have to explain yourself to anyone anymore. Everyone already knows." I told him I had never needed to explain myself. He smiled in the way he smiles when he agrees with something, but is going to say the thing anyway. "I know, Mom, but now they don't need you to." We stood at the railing a while longer. The ships were lit, the water moved. My mother called at 9:17 that night. I was back at the hotel with my shoes off, sitting at the window looking at the harbor in the dark. Patricia Calloway, 76 years old, calling on a Thursday evening with the particular quality in her voice of someone who has been sitting with something and has decided to say it. She had talked to Ryan. She had watched the short video on her phone. Claire had taken it at the ceremony, the moment where Ryan and I were standing near the bow and he briefly took my hand. And she had been told about the quarterdeck. She was quiet for a moment after I answered. Then she said, "I'm sorry I didn't understand what you were doing. I should have. A long time ago." It was not a complete accounting. It did not address the intervention dinner or the Sunday proposals or 20 years of gentle, loving, persistent pressure to become something smaller. It was an old woman saying the truest thing she could find in the language she had available. And it was late, and it was imprecise, and it was entirely genuine. I know the difference between people who are trying and people who are not trying. And I know what it cost my mother to say anything direct about anything that matters. I said, "I know, Mom. Thank you." She asked if I was well. I said yes. She said she was glad. We talked for 11 minutes about other things. What she'd been watching on television, whether Dana's youngest was doing better in school, and I was entirely glad to be talking to her about those things, which was its own kind of answer to every question. After I hung up, I put my shoes back on and went outside. The Norfolk waterfront at night has its own specific quality. The ships lit against the dark water, the sound of water moving against the pier, the particular smell that never fully leaves your memory once you've spent time in the Navy. I walked without a destination. The air was cool, the kind of April evening that is still deciding whether to be winter or spring. I walked with no particular purpose except to be outside, which is something I do when I have processed a great deal in a short time and need the body to do something simple. The prosthetic is carbon fiber, and it has been part of my body in the practical sense for 20 years. It is not a metaphor, and it is not a symbol, and it is not a burden. It is the equipment that carries me, the same as any equipment you maintain and rely on and take for granted, because you have been using it long enough. I do not think about it the way people who have not lost a limb imagine you must think about it. I think about it the way you think about your knees, not at all until something reminds you, and then only briefly. I walked and I thought about Ryan pinning on his devices with steady hands. I thought about Master Chief Vasquez stepping in front of a captain and snapping to rigid attention with a salute that had nothing performative in it and everything deliberate. I thought about Dana saying, "I'm proud of you, Maggie." I don't think I've ever said that, and about my mother saying I should have understood. I thought about parallel bars in a rehabilitation facility in 2005, a kid at the end of them with his hand out, saying, "I got you, Mom." And I thought about the drive from Richmond to Norfolk in the fall of 2007, the radio off and the decision forming, and the clarity that arrived by the time the base lights came up on the horizon. I am 51 years old. I have been in the United States Navy for 29 years. I have 2 stars on my shoulder boards, and a son who became an officer because he watched me not stop, and a box of letters from a 9-year-old in a shoebox in my apartment in Arlington. I have a leg that a great many people, over a great many years, believed would be the end of the story I was trying to tell. It was never close to the end. It was one chapter in a much longer story, and every chapter after it was better. I stopped at the railing and looked out at the harbor, at the ships with their running lights, at the dark water moving steadily underneath everything. And I thought, I would do every single day of it again. Every hill and every shore billet and every Sunday proposal and every intervention dinner, every evaluation board and every setback and every morning that I put the prosthetic on before I went to work. Every single day without one revision. And then I turned around and walked back toward the hotel. Steadily, deliberately, the way I have always walked. The way I intend to keep walking. If you have ever been told that what happened to you is the end of your story, I want you to know that it isn't. The story is still going. Keep going. There's something I've thought about a lot since that morning on the quarterdeck. Not the captain's face, not the silence that followed the salute, but the fact that I kept walking. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. And that more than any rank I've ever pinned on is the thing I'm proud of. 29 years of not stopping. That's the whole story. If this one landed somewhere for you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Tell me about a time someone underestimated you, or a time you kept going when it would have been easier to stop. I read every single one. If you've been watching and you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. Hit subscribe and the bell.